Right, welcome back to our final lecture of the week, and that is, of course, the fall. So, getting right to it, what is the fall? First of all, the fall in the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Islamic tradition is the answer to what is wrong with the world. So, big questions, right? Big questions. Where did we come from? Who are we? What's wrong? What's wrong with the world? What do we do in light of the answers to these previous three questions? And then where are we going? Where's this whole thing headed? So these are the five major questions that bear out the scope of historical trajectory in the understanding of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, the question of what is wrong is, of course, the one of the most unavoidable questions that we run into. There is the possibility that nothing's wrong at all, that this is just, if this is an accident of, cosmic conditions, of thoughtless processes, if there is no God, if there is no creator, then this is just nature working itself out. There's no wrong in that sense. There are things we don't prefer. There are things we don't like. There are things that don't fit with natural selection and thus the best way of preserving the species. But natural selection preserves the species that bear out through adaptation. So it's not an eschatological reality. If we are bound to destroy ourselves, say by nuclear holocaust or through global warming, or if just the planet dies out for whatever reason or hit by a comet, it's not as though evolution says, dang it, I really was pulling for those dang humans. No, that's not how it works. There's nothing really wrong. There's no moral component to the world. Morality is just a social construct, likely built out of the evolutionary imperatives that help us to ensure that we survive. We're just very interesting only in the sense that we have evolved to the point that we realized we evolved. So otherwise, in most religious thought, there is this sense that something is wrong with the world. Something is objectively wrong with the world. The world is not as it should be. Now, I want to look at that language of should be for a second. As it ought to be, as it should be. This, again, as we've been talking about through this entire creation narrative in the Bible, in Genesis, is this idea of intention, all right? That creation has an intention, that it is designed for a particular kind of way of living, that humans have purpose, that humans have meaning, and humans are meant for certain kinds of experiences, and humans are meant to do certain kinds of things. And so the fall at the fundamental level is missing that intention. The fall from grace, the fall from of rectitude, the fall from basic original goodness, all of these things are the same thing. It's a fall from the original intention. And so that is caught up or absorbed in the concept, the Judeo-Christian concept of sin. So sin is the basis for the fall. Now, sin in Hebrew is the word hatah, which means to miss the mark. It's an archery term. So the idea is that you didn't hit the target. All right, so that's what sin is, and its most basic level. Sin is not something capricious that the creator just doesn't like, or the creator has just a, like I just don't like pork, and therefore if you eat it, it's a sin. No, that's not what sin is in its fundamental reality. In its fundamental reality, humans were created with an intention. They had a target. They had a mark that they were supposed to hit, that they were supposed to accomplish. They had an end that they were supposed to reach. And sin, in an unconditional and utterly complete way, missed that mark. So, what was that mark? Well, it's the four fundamental relationships of creation, in the most general sense, as we've been talking about. So, what are the four fundamental relationships of creation? I'll give you a second. And they are humans and creation, humans and self, and humans and God. So the intention, as we've been talking about, of creation is that these relationships are carried out in proper order, in proper harmony, for the proper end and good of creation itself. Because humans are part of creation while also being a central aspect to creation. Humans are the key to creation as the mediator, as we talked about microcosm of macrocosm, but they're also creation as well. So humans are to have a fruitful relationship with creation itself as stewards. They are to have harmonious relationships with other humans. That we would, through our reasonable capacities, be able to help each other flourish and not kill each other. When you saw the Noah creation scene, which I love that scene, when it gets to the moment of the fall, there's those iterations of the various like war technologies that soldiers have armed themselves with over the millennia. There's something so profound about that. And so that is not supposed to be. That is not the intention. And so when we war, for example, we are missing the mark. Humans and self. That we are conscious beings. We're not supposed to be at odds with ourselves. We're not supposed to be incapable of understanding ourselves or ordering our life towards the ultimate relationship, of course, which is humans and God. That we were created by and stamped with the image of God, getting this special, unique capacity among all of creations, except for angels and demons. But that's a side of Christianity that we just don't have time to get into, what all that means and how that can be interpreted. But either way, humans bear this unique aspect, and they are created in the image of God, thus have the capacity, the capax Dei, to be in a relationship with God unlike any other creatures can, that's freely, volitionally willed and reciprocated by a conscious, self-aware love, and that we can share in a special way in God's nature through the transcendentals, which are being, truth, unity, goodness, and beauty. So, what was the sin? Was it really just eating from a tree? All right. This, of course, gets to the very famous question. There's a lot of interesting questions. Who did Cain go live with, and the people of Nod, if Adam and Eve were the first humans, and these kinds of questions. Again, we're gonna interpret this mythologically. All right. So literal or non-literal is not what we're going for. Those are interesting and important questions in their own rights, and I don't mean to be dismissive of them. But for our purposes, they're not what we're trying to get at when we read these narratives, okay? So, was it really just eating from a tree? That does seem capricious, A, like, just don't eat from the tree, right? But B, it seems kind of dumb. I mean, why put the tree there? If you don't want humans to eat from it, why put it there? And why let this gall-darn snake in the garden? You're God. Snake sneaks in. You could have made it impossible for him to sneak in, but snake sneaks in. You could have gone, and then the snake goes flying. Sorry, that image just seemed really funny to me somehow. So why? What's going on here? Well, there's a lot of cosmic mythology in terms of like angels and demons, or fallen angels, and that sort of cosmic war that's happening that, again, we can't get into. And I'm sorry I keep bringing it up, but it is important to theological thought and understanding. But there's also just a basic notion that whether it was a literal tree or not, the issue is that a choice was offered, which is for humans to obey, be in harmony with the proper order that God has created. And when they ate from the tree, mythologically speaking, they committed an act that was contrary to the Creator's intention and to the design of the four fundamental relationships. Now, for example, just so you can have a taste of how people can understand this, were we never supposed to have a knowledge of good and evil and so forth and so on? There's a lot of different interpretations of what that means. C.S. Lewis takes an interpretation of it was arbitrary in as much as we just had to obey. And then if we had obeyed, we could have then eaten from the tree. And because we had proven ourselves, so to speak. Irenaeus, a 2nd century Christian thinker, one of the most brilliant Christian minds in all of history, has something more akin to what I would think. It's somewhat like Lewis in that humans are created in this stage of infancy, and they need to grow up, so to speak, and become ready to eat from that tree. So it wasn't that the tree was forbidden always. The text doesn't say that. The text doesn't say you can never eat from this tree. The text says don't eat from the tree. And so that leaves this kind of hermeneutical space, this interpretive space where we can think about whether or not we may have eaten from the tree. And I happen to think we would have eventually. And again, I'm not talking about it actually being some kind of magic tree where you pull a fruit down, eat it, and you're like, holy crap, good and evil, right? No, I don't think that's what's going on. But that there's this kind of pedagogical narrative to the cosmos, that one day we would have gotten this knowledge in its proper time. You don't. Okay. If you've helped babysit or raise children, you can't. When a toddler is chucking things at you, for example, you cannot sit the child down and say, "Now, toddler, I want to explain to you why, in rational, mature terms, it is inappropriate and bad behavior to chuck objects at other human beings." No, they're not going to understand that. They're incapable of understanding that. They don't have enough maturity to even comprehend what you're saying. And so you can only say, no, don't do that. It is not allowed. And then when they get old enough, through training, through habituation, through being raised around, hopefully, rational, good people, they come to understand why that is not okay. And so, that is, I think, what's going on in this narrative. That we don't know, they were not ready to understand good and evil for whatever reason. Which is also borne out not only in the disobedience, but the fact that what happens after they eat from the tree? Well, everything that's bad with the world. So the first act after the fall, what is it? Well, it's Cain killing Abel. It's Cain committing the first act of unwarranted, if violence is ever warranted, unwarranted, malicious, malignant, and utterly hate-filled evil by murdering another human being. For no good reason, for jealousy, for envy, for pride's and ego's sake. I love this in the bottom right corner. I have trouble right and left. I don't know why. I'm like an adult, right? But anyway, this moment of grieving. I don't think we often think about that. It's one of those aspects of art that really can kind of draw out the deep humanity of religion. that Adam and Eve grieve for their son who is dead, and the son they've also lost because he's been banished. It's honestly quite profound if you can see these stories outside of what culture sometimes dismissively refers to when it talks about religion, or like kind of the Bible stories that we were told growing up. I didn't myself grow up in the church, so I didn't have that experience, but I know some people, they just remember this from like church school. But this is a deeply human story. And then what happens after the fall? It's this cavalcade of unremitting, unending violence. The line of Cain comes to culmination in Lamech, who says, Cain avenged sevenfold, I will avenge 77-fold. Remember 7, right? That's like, I will do it and do it to its utter completion. I will murder anyone who insults or strikes at me, right? And so it gets to the point where it's almost out of control. Perhaps it is completely out of control, aside from that God is somehow allowing it to not get too out of control. And so this gets to the narrative of the flood. Now, did the flood really happen? Something happened. We have enough anthropological evidence that at least in the Mediterranean world, there was some sort of aquatic cataclysmic event. It's in the memory. If you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I encourage you to do. It's considered to be pretty much the first epic, and it is epic. It's awesome. But Gilgamesh, the main character, runs into an old man who's kind of a sage or a bard, and he then says, way, way back, and this is a narrative written somewhere around 18th century BC, so we're talking like 4,000 years ago. And this man's saying, way back beyond memory almost, there was this great flood. So even then it was considered to be some sort of really ancient event, but it had such a psychological scarring effect on the people of the Mediterranean, where we find this flood narrative, particularly in the ancient Near East, like in what's now Palestine, Israel, and Egypt and so forth, that there was something that happened that was just, people couldn't wrap their minds on it, and so it just stamped itself within the mythology that they were, working out. But the point of the flood is that humans have they have failed so completely, and the fall has such an overwhelming, penetrating effect that they, as it says, have no good thought. In the text it says that every inclination of the heart of the human is evil. Evil! And so God starts over. And it doesn't work. And again, we can talk about what does it mean that it doesn't work, and what does this say about God? I don't think that that's what the narrative is about, again, but maybe that would be good for a discussion thread. Once we get going on that, talk about what does that mean. But either way, starts over with Noah, and then before too long, they're doing it again. Humans are once again trying to master creation through tyranny instead of proper stewardship, and they're working together to usurp God. Right? Now, this is good also with the mythological aspects. Do we really think that humans could have built a tower so tall that it went into space and got to heaven, and then thrown God off of his throne, overthrown God? Well, no, of course not. This is also part of mythology. Mythology is trying to explain why things are the way they are. If we all come from one family of humans, then how are we all speaking completely disparate languages? Well, this is a way of explaining that. But that's not the point of the narrative. The point of the narrative is that humans aren't being properly ordered in creation. They're trying to rule it as gods, and they're not, and never can be. Same as the sin of Lucifer, the devil, or Satan. These are two of my favorite depictions of the Tower of Babel. The one on the left is from the 16th century. The one on the right, I use his art a lot. Gustave Doré, he was a French artist and like engineer and all kinds of stuff. And he does these great engravings and paintings. And so he was in the 19th century, and so this is one of my favorites of his. So what do all these stories have in common? Well, the four fundamental relationships and our failure to hit those marks. Remember what they are? Ha ha! Humans creation, humans and humans, humans and self, humans and God. All of these stories are just unfolding how the fall has precipitated a situation where humans will not keep the relationships. They miss the mark, and they're going to do it again and again and again and again. It will never end. It will never stop. Humans are not properly ordering with creation, as we see in the story of the Nephilim and the Tower of Babel. They're not in proper relations with each other. In Cain and Abel, in the flood, they're all just bent on violence. That's what it says. They're bent on it. The humans and self. We're not supposed to think like evil. That's not what we're supposed to be. That's not who we're supposed to be. And of course, humans and God. You know, the Tower of Babel being this kind of culminating narrative of the fall. This is as bad as it gets. That's where the creation story of Genesis doesn't really end until chapter 11. When humans are trying to usurp God. It is the culmination of how deep this hata goes. How flagrantly we have missed the mark. As if our teacher had said, hit that mark, and we said, okay, and then we turned around and shot him. Or in this case, tried to. I don't think you could really kill God with an arrow. So they incur God's wrath. That's another theme of this story. Now, what is God's wrath? Of course, I know the lecture's going a little long. I apologize for that, but just, kind of bear with me. If you need to take a break, you can always press pause. But God's wrath, what is it? Well, as we've talked about, God is a transcendent being. We've got the absolute attributes, aseity, simplicity, infinity, internality, and immutability. And in that regard, God's wrath is not like an actual human emotion, okay? This is what we call anthropomorphizing, anthropomorphism, which is when we give God qualities of creaturely beings, generally humans, which is where the anthro comes from. Anthropos means human, like anthropology, study of human culture. And so we again, like we talked about, like God's not really holding the universe in God's hand. No, he doesn't. God doesn't have a hand. But God is sustaining the universe. God's wrath is not God getting so angry that God can't handle it anymore, and God's up in heaven throwing a temper tantrum and, like, I don't know, kicking chairs and pulling over bookshelves and stuff because God's so mad. No, that's not how God's wrath works. God's not gotten so angry that God lost control. God doesn't lose control, because there's nothing we can do to endanger God. Most anger comes from fear. It comes from the fear that we are under serious threat. God doesn't have that. There's nothing in all of reality, not just in the universe, there's nothing in all of reality that can threaten God. So it's not anger in that sense. It's not anger like God is having an emotion that is bubbling over. No. It is God's permittance that we shall pay for sin because of the consequences of sin's actions. Sin is the punishment for sin. Sin is its own reward, so to speak. The reason why the wages of sin is death is because sin destroys us. That's the thing that is really important theologically speaking when we're talking about sin. Friends, when we're talking about sin, we're talking about something that is actually bad for us. it goes against the intention of the Creator. It's destructive. It is not in harmony ordered with the four fundamental relationships. And so what we will reap from sowing sin is pain, violence, hurt, hatred, fear. These are things are not of God. They're of us. And so the curse is not God paying us back like God's spanking us for the rest of eternity. No, God is allowing us to bear the consequences of our actions, which is sin. And sin has its own consequences because it's bad for us, because it's evil. Now, there are three different kinds of sin. Most of the time people get these, first individual sin, that's the most obvious. And we all know this. We all feel this. Every one of us, if we're really honest and true, good people, all have looked in the mirror and realized that we're not true, honest, and good people. Of course, I don't know. Most of us have had the experience that, Rainbow Bright, Every Child is a Unique Flower Academy, and been told you're all special and you're all good and you're all sweet and everything, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's just not true, and we all know it. Now, we do, of course, all have value, and we are all unique, but we are all also crappy people who do evil things, and do evil things even when we know that they're evil and that we ought not do them. And there's social sin. This is borne out in institutions. Slavery is a social sin. It's a sin of a people, not just of individuals, but of a people, of a nation. What the Nazis did, that was sin. The institutions of racism and sexism in America, these are social sins. Those are sins of the American people. And then, of course, there's this cosmic sin. Human sin has cosmic effects. So if humans are the microcosm of the macrocosm, and somehow, all of creation inheres within the human nature, if humans sin, that is going to break creation in some way. If we are the center of all the actual relationships that are the culmination of the intention of creation, and we actively break the harmony of those relationships, that is an effect that will reverberate cosmically throughout the universe. Everything is affected. Now, we can talk about what that means on the ground, but the point is that the reason why this world sucks in so many ways is because of us. We are the problem, ultimately speaking. What's wrong with the world? Humans. That's what Christianity teaches. Humans are the problem. Why is the world the way it is? Why does, there's starvation and there's this and there's that. Everybody's, why? Why is the world so evil? Why? Blah, blah, blah. Because of us. We make it that way by continually not living in harmony with the intention of the Creator. And so this is the fall of everything. The world is incapable of healing itself. It is so far gone. It can't stop itself at this point. It's like an addict. It can't stop trying to get and misuse that thing that makes it feel good for a second, but ultimately is destroying that person. We are on a crash course for destruction. That's what's wrong with the world. That's what the fall teaches. And so the question becomes, if we're the problem, what is the solution? Will God abandon creation to its evil ends? Will God leave us to destruction? And that gets answered in chapter 12 with the calling of Abraham. And that's where we'll pick up next week.